Wait in the car. Those 4 words destroyed everything I thought I knew about being a mother. Maybe some broken hearts never heal. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I'd share. And if you, for even a second, feel like this sounds familiar, just please leave a like and subscribe. It'll help me keep finding the courage to speak these truths that so many of us carry in silence. My name is Margaret Stone, and at 74, I thought I understood disappointment. I'd buried my husband 3 years ago, sold the house where I'd raised my children, and moved 2 hours away from everything familiar just to be closer to my daughter Lindsay. I thought proximity meant love. I thought sacrifice meant gratitude. I was wrong about so many things. That September morning started like any other wedding day should, with hope. I'd woken before dawn in my small apartment, the one I could barely afford after giving Lindsay $12,000 for her wedding expenses. The morning light filtered through curtains I'd bought at Walmart. Nothing like the custom drapes I'd once hung in my real home, but I didn't mind. This was temporary, I told myself. Once Lindsay settled into married life, once she saw how much I'd given up to be near her, things would change. I'd chosen my outfit weeks earlier. A soft lavender dress with a matching jacket, modest heels that wouldn't embarrass her, and the pearl necklace Robert had given me for our 20th anniversary. I applied my makeup with the same careful precision I'd used as a hospital nurse for 37 years, each stroke deliberate and practiced. My reflection showed a woman trying too hard to matter, but I didn't recognize that desperation then. The drive to Bellhurst Estate took 45 minutes through Chicago's northwest suburbs, past neighborhoods where young families pushed strollers and tended gardens behind white picket fences. I'd imagined living in places like that once, back when I believed hard work and love guaranteed happy endings. The radio played songs from my youth, Sinatra, Bennett, voices from when the world made more sense. Bellhurst Estate rose from manicured grounds like something from a fairy tale. White columns stretched 2 stories high, supporting a wraparound porch decorated with climbing roses. Floor-to-ceiling windows sparkled in the morning sun, and I could hear the distant sound of a string quartet tuning their instruments. This was everything Lindsay had dreamed of since she was 12 years old, poring over bridal magazines and planning a future that somehow never quite included me in the details. I parked near the front entrance, my hands trembling slightly as I turned off the engine. Through the windshield, I watched vendors carrying arrangements of white roses and baby's breath, flowers I'd helped select, arrangements I'd helped pay for. The sight should have filled me with pride, but instead, I felt that familiar knot of anxiety that had lived in my stomach for months. Lindsay appeared before I could even step out of the car, leaning down to my driver's side window with the impatient energy of a bride running behind schedule. Her dark hair was already pinned in elaborate curls beneath her veil, and her makeup was flawless. Professional work that had probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. She looked beautiful, radiant, everything a bride should be. "Hey, Mom," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone I'd grown to recognize, the one that meant she needed something but wished she didn't have to ask me for it. No greeting kiss, no comment about my dress, no acknowledgement of the 45-minute drive, or the months of planning that had brought us to this moment. "Can you wait in the car? Just for now?" The words came out in a rush, as if she were afraid I might protest. "It's a little hectic inside, and we're still setting up. But I need you to handle the vendor payments. You know, like we discussed." She thrust a cream-colored envelope through the window, thick with checks I'd written and signed days earlier. Each one represented months of careful budgeting, hours of overtime shifts I'd picked up at the clinic even after retirement, dinners of soup and crackers so I could contribute to her perfect day. The florist, the photographer, the DJ, they're all expecting their final payments, she continued, already backing away from the car. "You remember the amounts, right? And then we'll get you later, okay?" She didn't wait for my response. She simply turned and walked back toward the estate, her veil flowing behind her like a ghost of all the dreams I'd once had about this day. I watched her link arms with Diane Patterson, her future mother-in-law, a woman who owned her own real estate company and drove a Mercedes and had never once doubted her place in her son's life. I sat there with that envelope in my lap, feeling the weight of those checks like stones in my chest. Through the windshield, I watched the real guests begin to arrive. Couples in expensive suits and cocktail dresses, laughing and embracing, taking selfies against the backdrop of Lindsay's perfect day. I saw Diane directing the photographer, adjusting Lindsay's dress, holding her bouquet while she posed. And me? I was the elderly woman in the 15-year-old Toyota Corolla, parked out front like hired help waiting for instructions. The realization hit me slowly, like cold water seeping through fabric. I wasn't a guest at this wedding. I wasn't family celebrating a milestone. I was a service provider, someone to handle the unpleasant business of money while the real family, Diane's family, created memories that would last a lifetime. 74 years old, and I was being asked to wait in the car like a child or a pet that couldn't be trusted inside. Sitting in that car, clutching those checks, memories flooded back like a dam breaking. How many times had I waited? How many times had I been the convenient solution to Lindsay's problems? Only to be forgotten the moment the crisis passed. 3 years ago, when Robert died of a sudden heart attack at 68, Lindsay had called me crying. "Mom, I can't imagine you alone in that big house. Why don't you move closer to us? We can spend more time together." Her voice had been so tender, so convincing. I'd felt grateful that my daughter wanted me near during the darkest period of my life. What she hadn't mentioned was that she and her fiancé, Brad, were drowning in student loans and credit card debt. What she hadn't said was that moving closer meant being available for emergency babysitting, grocery runs, and the kind of financial support that came disguised as family helping family. I sold the 4-bedroom colonial where Robert and I had built our life together. The house with the kitchen where I'd packed thousands of school lunches. The backyard where we'd hosted birthday parties and barbecues. The master bedroom where I'd held him during his final weeks when cancer ravaged his body before the heart attack finally claimed him. 43 years of memories, reduced to a moving sale and a real estate transaction that netted me enough for the small apartment near Lindsay's neighborhood. "You'll love having your own place," she'd said, helping me sort through decades of accumulated life. "And it'll be so nice having you just 20 minutes away." She'd been efficient about deciding what I should keep and what I should let go of, her euphemism for throwing away the artifacts of my life that didn't fit into 800 square feet of senior living. The first few months she'd visited regularly. We'd have coffee on Saturday mornings and she'd tell me about her job at the marketing firm, her plans with Brad, the wedding they were dreaming about. I'd cook her favorite meals, the pot roast and mashed potatoes she'd loved as a child, the chocolate chip cookies I'd made for every school bake sale. For a brief time, I believed I'd made the right choice. Then the requests started. "Mom, I hate to ask, but could you watch Bentley this weekend? Brad's sister is getting married, and pet-friendly hotels are so expensive." Bentley was their golden retriever, a beautiful dog, but one that required medication, special food, and constant attention. One weekend became most weekends. I found myself planning my social activities around their social calendar. "Mom, you're so good with numbers. Could you help me figure out this insurance mess? They're saying I owe money I don't think I owe." Hours spent on hold with customer service representatives, deciphering medical bills and fighting claims denials while Lindsay was at work or out with friends. "Mom, remember that lamp from the house? The one with the stained glass shade? I think it would look perfect in our living room." One by one, pieces of my former life migrated to their apartment. The good dishes, the antique mirror, the oak dining set that had been my mother's. "We're just holding on to them for you," she'd say, "until you have more space." But the space never expanded, and the belongings never returned. I learned to eat on paper plates because my good china was displaying salads I'd never taste in a home where I was always a visitor, never family. The financial requests started small. "Mom, our car registration is due, but we're a little tight this month. Could you float us $200? We'll pay you back next week." Next week became next month, became never mentioned again. The amounts grew larger, the explanations more elaborate, the gratitude shorter-lived. When Lindsay announced her engagement, I'd been genuinely thrilled. Brad seemed like a decent man, quiet, ambitious, devoted to her happiness. The proposal had been romantic. A sunset picnic in Lincoln Park with professional photographs and a ring that cost more than I'd ever spent on jewelry in my lifetime. "Mom, We want you to be so involved in the planning, she'd gushed, showing me the ring with fingers that trembled with excitement. Being involved, I learned, meant funding. The engagement party at an upscale restaurant in downtown Chicago. Mom, we really want to make a good impression on Brad's family. The wedding dress from an exclusive boutique in Streeterville. Mom, this is my once-in-a-lifetime dress. I'll treasure it forever. The venue deposit for Bellhurst Estate. Mom, they need $3,000 to hold our date. We'll reimburse you as soon as Brad's bonus comes through. Brad's bonus never materialized, or if it did, it went toward their honeymoon in Italy, their new furniture, their upgraded apartment in a building with a doorman and lake views. Meanwhile, I was eating generic cereal for breakfast and walking instead of driving to save money on gas. I'd started picking up shifts at a medical clinic, using my nursing background to help with basic patient care. At 71, I was the oldest employee by 15 years. But the extra income meant I could continue helping Lindsay without dipping into the savings I'd need for my own uncertain future. My feet ached in shoes that had seen better days. My back protested hours of standing. But I told myself it was temporary. Once the wedding was over, once they were established, I could rest. You're such an amazing mom, Lindsay would say after I'd handed over another check. I don't know what we'd do without you. The words felt like payment of sorts. Validation that my sacrifices mattered, that I was building something lasting with my generosity. But sitting in that car, watching Diane adjust Lindsay's veil with the natural intimacy of someone whose presence was treasured rather than tolerated, I began to understand the difference between being needed and being valued. I was the ATM that never questioned withdrawals, the babysitter who never charged, the problem solver who never complained about being awakened at midnight with crises that somehow always required immediate financial intervention. 3 months ago, I'd made the largest contribution yet, $12,000 toward the final wedding expenses. Mom, this is it, Lindsay had promised. After this, we'll be financially stable. Brad's getting promoted, and I'm up for a raise. We'll be able to start paying you back for everything. She'd hugged me then, one of the few physical affections I'd received from her in months, and I'd felt hopeful that my investments in her happiness would finally yield returns. The promotion never came. Or if it did, the priorities had shifted. There were student loans to pay, a new car to finance, furniture that couldn't wait. The wedding had consumed not just my money, but my dignity, transforming me from mother to benefactor to unwanted reminder of debt and obligation. Was I used? The question formed itself in my mind with crystalline clarity, and for the first time, I couldn't dismiss it with maternal rationalization. Had my daughter spent 3 years systematically extracting everything I had to offer while giving back only the bare minimum affection necessary to keep me compliant? A knock on my passenger window startled me from these dark thoughts. A young man in a black vest, probably the wedding coordinator, smiled and gestured toward the envelope in my lap. Mrs. Stone, I'm here for the vendor payments. We're ready to start processing the final arrangements. I looked at him through the glass, this stranger who knew my name because I was the one who paid the bills, and felt something crack open in my chest. Not my heart. That would suggest something clean and sudden. This was messier, like old wood splintering under too much weight. The slow collapse of a structure that had been bearing more than it was designed to handle for far too long. I handed the coordinator the envelope through a crack in the window, my fingers trembling as I released my grip on those checks. Each one felt like a piece of my soul being torn away. Thank you, ma'am, he said with professional courtesy. The ceremony starts in about an hour. Will you be joining us inside? The question hung in the air like smoke. I opened my mouth to explain that I was the bride's mother, that I'd paid for half of what he was about to deliver to vendors, that I'd driven here believing I belonged somewhere in this beautiful day. Instead, I heard myself whisper, I'm not sure yet. He nodded politely and walked away, leaving me alone with the growing realization that I truly wasn't sure of anything anymore. I sat there for 23 minutes, watching the parade of guests stream past my car window. Couples my age, dressed in their finest clothes, chatting excitedly about the bride and groom. Young families with children in tiny suits and frilly dresses, looking forward to dancing and cake. Everyone had a place, a role, a reason to be there that went beyond financial obligation. Then I saw them together, Lindsay and Diane, walking arm in arm toward the garden where the ceremony would take place. They were laughing about something, their heads tilted together with the intimacy of women who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Diane's hand rested naturally on Lindsay's arm, and Lindsay leaned into her future mother-in-law's touch with a warmth I hadn't seen her show me in years. That's when the first crack appeared in my carefully constructed denial. I watched Diane straighten Lindsay's veil with gentle precision, smoothing a wrinkle that probably only another woman would notice. I watched Lindsay's face soften with gratitude, with trust, with the kind of open affection that daughters are supposed to share with their mothers, and I realized that somewhere along the way, I had been replaced. Not officially, not dramatically, but slowly and methodically. While I was writing checks and solving problems and making myself indispensable through financial support, Diane had been building an actual relationship with my daughter. She'd been present for dress fittings not as an ATM, but as a woman who understood fashion and had opinions worth hearing. She'd been included in wedding planning not as a resource to be tapped, but as family whose preferences mattered. My phone buzzed. A text from Lindsay. The vendors are asking about seating arrangements. Did you handle the payments? We need to get this sorted ASAP. Not, how are you doing, Mom? Not, thank you for everything. Just another task. Another problem for me to solve while she created memories with the woman she'd chosen to fill the mother role in her new life. I stared at that text until the words blurred together. ASAP. As soon as possible. The acronym felt like an epitaph for our relationship. Everything urgent, nothing lasting. Every interaction reduced to immediate needs and quick solutions. No time for the slower work of building actual intimacy. My fingers hovered over the phone keyboard. I wanted to type back, I've been handling payments for 2 years. I've been handling everything for 2 years. What I haven't been handling is being treated like I matter. Instead, I typed, done, payments processed. The response came immediately. Great, see you later. See you later. Not, come inside now. Not, find your seat. Not, I can't wait to share this moment with you. Just the vague promise of acknowledgement at some undefined future point when it was convenient for her. I put the phone face down on the passenger seat and tried to remember the last time Lindsay had called me just to talk. Not to request something, not to solve a crisis, not to coordinate logistics. Just to hear my voice because she missed me. I couldn't remember. I tried to recall the last time she'd asked about my life, my health, my loneliness in that small apartment where I ate dinner alone 7 nights a week. The question felt foreign, like trying to remember a language I'd once spoken fluently, but had forgotten through disuse. The realization settled over me like a heavy blanket. I had become a function in Lindsay's life, not a person. I was the emergency mom, activated when needed, stored away when not, available for financial crises, babysitting emergencies, and complicated adult problems that required someone else's time and energy to solve. But I wasn't the daily mom anymore. I wasn't the woman she called when she had good news to share, when she needed advice about relationships, when she wanted to process the small victories and defeats that make up ordinary life. That role had been filled by friends, by Brad, by Diane, people who offered companionship rather than just solutions. A woman in a navy blue dress walked past my car, struggling with 3 small children in formal wear. One of them had dropped something, and she was juggling a diaper bag, a purse, and a squirming toddler while trying to retrieve whatever had fallen. Without thinking, I rolled down my window. "Do you need help?" I called out. She looked up, startled but grateful. "Oh, thank you. If you could just grab that toy car." My hands are full. I got out of my car for the first time in an hour, picked up the small red car, and handed it to her youngest child. "There you go, sweetheart." "Thank you so much," the woman said, adjusting her grip on the toddler. "I'm sorry. Are you here for the wedding too? I don't think we've met." I started to say, the bride's mother, but the words stuck in my throat. Was I? Did being a mother mean anything if your child had moved on to other maternal figures? Did biological connection matter if emotional connection had been severed? "I'm Margaret," I said finally. "I'm Sarah, Brad's cousin." Are you family or friend? The question that should have been simplest to answer felt impossible. It's complicated. Sarah smiled with the understanding of someone who'd encountered complicated family dynamics before. Aren't they all? Well, I hope you enjoy the ceremony. It's going to be beautiful. She walked away with her children, leaving me standing beside my car, wondering how I'd become someone who couldn't even identify her own role at her daughter's wedding. My phone rang. Not Lindsay. She was probably too busy posing for photos and basking in Diane's attention. It was Brad's aunt, someone I'd met exactly twice, calling because apparently I was still the point person for vendor coordination. Margaret, the caterer needs to know about the dietary restrictions. There's some confusion about the vegetarian count. Another problem. Another urgent need for my intervention. I spent 12 minutes on the phone with the caterer, scrolling through notes I'd taken months ago about guests' food allergies and preferences. Information that Lindsay had asked me to track because she was too busy with work to manage all the details. When I hung up, I noticed the ceremony music had started. Through the estate's windows, I could see guests taking their seats in the garden. The string quartet was playing something classical and romantic, the kind of music that was supposed to make moments feel eternal and perfect. I wasn't invited to witness any of it. I was the backstage crew, the invisible support system that kept the show running while the real family experienced the magic. I sat back down in my car and finally let myself cry. Not the delicate tears of a woman trying to preserve her makeup, but the ugly, bone-deep sobs of someone who'd just realized she'd been living a lie for years. The kind of crying that comes from understanding that love is not always reciprocal, that sacrifice is not always recognized, that being needed is not the same as being cherished. The worst part wasn't the exclusion from the ceremony. The worst part was the growing certainty that this moment had been inevitable, that I'd been writing myself out of Lindsay's story one check at a time, one solved problem at a time, one boundary crossed at a time. I had taught her that my love came without conditions, without limits, without the requirement of basic respect. And she had learned that lesson perfectly. I must have cried for 20 minutes in that car before my phone started ringing like an emergency alarm. The ceremony had clearly ended because suddenly everyone needed Margaret to fix something, coordinate something, pay for something. The first call came from the photographer. Mrs. Stone, there seems to be some confusion about the reception timeline. The bride mentioned you handle the logistics? Of course she did. Even on her wedding day, Lindsay was delegating the messy details to me while she glided through the pretty parts with Diane by her side. I'll get back to you, I managed, my voice still thick from crying. Then the DJ called, then the wedding planner, then the catering manager. Each conversation the same. The bride said to check with you about, or, Lindsay told us you'd have the information about, or, we need your approval for. By the fourth call, something inside me started to harden. Not heal. That would take much longer. But crystallize, like water turning to ice in winter, preserving the pain while making it sharp and unbreakable. I turned my phone to silent and watched through my windshield as the cocktail hour began. Guests spilled from the ceremony onto the estate's terrace, holding champagne glasses that caught the afternoon sunlight. Laughter drifted through the air, mixing with the sound of clinking glasses and the gentle buzz of conversation. And there was Lindsay, radiant in her wedding dress, accepting congratulations and posing for photos with Brad and both sets of parents. Both sets. Diane stood on one side, elegant in her navy suit. Brad's father beside her in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. On the other side should have been Robert and me, but Robert was gone, and I was banished to the parking lot. Instead, Lindsay had invited her godmother Janet to stand in the family photos. Janet, who lived in California and saw Lindsay maybe twice a year. Janet, who had sent a generous wedding gift but hadn't contributed a penny to the actual wedding expenses. Janet, who got to smile for the photographer while I sat alone in my car, still wearing the perfume I'd put on that morning when I'd foolishly believed I mattered. That's when I noticed him. A little boy, maybe 7 years old, wandering away from the reception crowd toward the parking area. He was crying, clutching a torn boutonniere, his tiny tuxedo wrinkled from whatever mishap had befallen him. Without thinking, I got out of my car and approached him. "Hey there, sweetheart. Are you okay?" He looked up at me with tear-streaked cheeks. My flower got broken, and Mommy said I ruined it, and now the pictures will be ugly. My heart clenched. Here was this beautiful child, probably no older than my youngest grandchild. If I'd had grandchildren, if Lindsay had ever wanted to include me in that part of her future, being made to feel shame over something so trivial. "What's your name, honey?" "Tyler. I'm the ring bearer, but I messed up." I knelt down to his level, ignoring the protest from my 74-year-old knees. "Tyler, you didn't mess up anything. Sometimes flowers get broken. That doesn't make you bad or the picture's ugly. You want to know a secret?" He nodded, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. "The most beautiful pictures are the ones that show real life, and real life has broken flowers sometimes." I gently took the boutonniere from his small hands, twisted the stem to hide the damage, and pinned it back on his lapel. There. Good as new. Maybe even better, because now it has a story. Tyler's face brightened. "Really? Really? Now you better get back to your family before they worry about you." He hugged my legs quickly, then ran back toward the reception, his crisis forgotten, his joy restored. I stood there in the parking lot, watching him rejoin the celebration, and felt something shift inside me. I had just spent 5 minutes with a child I'd never met, offering him more genuine care and attention than my own daughter had shown me in months. The irony was devastating. My phone buzzed with another text from Lindsay. "Where are you? People are asking about dinner timing and I don't know what to tell them. People are asking. Not, 'I need you,' or 'I'm looking for you.' Just the passive acknowledgement that other people were inconvenienced by my absence." I stared at that text and made a decision that surprised even me. I typed back, "I'm not feeling well. You'll need to handle the reception details yourself." The response came within seconds. "What do you mean? You can't be sick right now. We need you. We need you." Not, "I hope you feel better," or, "Is there anything I can do?" Just the immediate assertion that my well-being was less important than my usefulness. Another text followed. "Mom, this is my wedding day. Please don't do this." Don't do what? Don't be human? Don't have feelings? Don't expect basic consideration on what was supposed to be one of the most important days in both our lives? Before I could respond, my phone rang. Lindsay calling, probably from the bridal suite where she was touching up her makeup between photo sessions. "Mom, what is going on? Everyone is asking me questions I don't know how to answer because you always handle this stuff." "Because I always handle this stuff," I repeated slowly. "Lindsay, do you realize what you just said?" "What?" "I'm just saying that you're better at organizing than I am. You know all the vendor details and timing and whose wedding is this?" The question came out sharper than I'd intended, but I didn't take it back. Silence on the other end. Then, "Mom, I don't understand why you're being like this. It's my wedding day. Can't we talk about whatever's bothering you tomorrow?" Tomorrow. When she'd be on her honeymoon in Italy, the trip I'd helped finance but would never see pictures of because she'd be too busy starting her new life to remember to share memories with the woman who'd made it possible. "What's bothering me," I said carefully, "is that I'm sitting in a parking lot while your real family celebrates inside. You're being dramatic. Of course you're family. You're my mother. Am I? Because mothers usually get invited to their daughters' weddings. They usually get seats at the ceremony. They usually get included in family photos instead of being asked to wait in the car like hired help." The silence stretched longer this time. When Lindsay spoke again, her voice had taken on the cold edge I'd been hearing more and more often lately. "I told you to wait in the car because things were hectic, not because you don't matter. And you are in the family photos. We took some at the house last week, remember? The family photos at the house. 5 minutes of rushed snapshots while she was getting ready to leave for her bachelorette party. Everyone checking their phones and looking impatient to move on to more important activities. Photos that felt like an obligation rather than a celebration. "Mom, I really need you to pull yourself together," Lindsay continued. "Diane is asking questions about the dinner service, and I don't know what to tell her. This is not the time for one of your moods. One of my moods." As if being hurt by exclusion and disrespect was a character flaw, rather than a normal human response to being treated poorly. One of my moods. The phrase echoed in my mind long after I hung up on Lindsay, my hands shaking as I placed the phone face down on the passenger seat. 74 years of life, 37 years of nursing, 28 years of motherhood, and my legitimate feelings had been reduced to one of my moods. I sat in that parking lot for another 10 minutes, watching guests drift back and forth between the cocktail hour and the reception hall. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the manicured grounds, and I realized I had a choice to make. I could go inside, paste on a smile, and spend the evening coordinating vendor schedules while Lindsay danced with her new family. Or I could do something I hadn't done in 3 years of being the convenient solution to every problem. I could leave. The thought felt revolutionary and terrifying at the same time. In all my years of marriage, motherhood, and widowhood, I had never simply walked away from an obligation. I had never put my own needs first when someone else claimed to need me more. I had never tested whether love could survive without my constant service and sacrifice. But sitting there, excluded from my own daughter's wedding while being blamed for having feelings about that exclusion, I realized I had nothing left to lose. The relationship I'd been fighting to preserve was already gone. I was just too scared to admit it. I started the car. The engine turned over with its familiar, reliable hum, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The possibility of choice. I could drive to the lake where Robert and I used to go for quiet weekends. I could check into a hotel and order room service and watch old movies without anyone needing me to solve their problems. I could disappear for a few hours and see if anyone noticed. As I pulled out of the Bellhurst Estate parking lot, my phone started ringing again. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. And again. By the time I reached the highway, I had 6 missed calls and a string of increasingly frantic text messages. I didn't look at them. Not yet. I drove north toward Lake Geneva, a route I'd traveled countless times with Robert during our marriage. The familiar landmarks passed by my window. The antique shop where we'd bought our first dining room table. The ice cream stand where we'd stopped on summer afternoons. The overlook where he'd proposed 45 years ago. Each memory felt like visiting an old friend, comforting in its consistency and warmth. The Lakeview Motor Inn hadn't changed much since Robert's death. Same neon sign, same gravel parking lot, same elderly clerk who'd been working the front desk for decades. He didn't recognize me. We'd always checked in together before. But he was kind in the way that people who work with travelers learn to be. "Just for tonight?" he asked, processing my credit card. "I'm not sure yet," I heard myself say. The honesty surprised me. When had I stopped knowing my own plans? When had my life become so reactive that I couldn't predict my own next move? "Well, you just let us know. Room 14, around the back. Nice and quiet." The room was small and clean, with a view of the lake through curtains that had seen better days. I sat on the edge of the bed and finally looked at my phone. 12 missed calls. 15 text messages. The progression told a story of escalating panic, but not the kind I'd expected. The first few texts were from Lindsay. "Mom, where did you go? People are asking about you. This is really embarrassing." Then Brad had started texting. "Margaret, Lindsay is upset. Can you please come back?" Then Diane. "Margaret, I don't know what happened, but we need to resolve this. The vendors are confused." The vendors. Even in crisis, it came back to logistics and money and my utility as a problem solver. But it was the voicemail from Lindsay that finally broke something open in my chest. Her voice was shaking, but not with sadness or concern for my well-being. She sounded angry, frustrated, like someone whose employee had quit without notice on the busiest day of the year. "Mom, I don't know what kind of statement you think you're making, but you're ruining my wedding. Everyone is asking where you are, and I don't know what to tell them. You're embarrassing me in front of Brad's family. Please just come back and we can talk about whatever's bothering you later." Ruining her wedding by being absent, by finally, for the first time in 3 years, being unavailable when she needed me to perform. I called the front desk. "Excuse me, this is Margaret Stone in room 14. Is your restaurant still open? Kitchen closes at 9, but you've got about an hour. Nothing fancy, but the food's good." When was the last time I'd eaten in a restaurant alone? When was the last time I'd ordered whatever I wanted without considering anyone else's preferences or budget constraints? I couldn't remember. The restaurant was nearly empty. Just me, an elderly couple sharing a quiet dinner, and a man in a business suit working on his laptop while eating a burger. The waitress was a woman about my age, maybe a few years younger, with kind eyes and comfortable shoes. "What can I get you, honey?" I looked at the menu and realized I had no idea what I wanted. For so long, my food choices had been about nutrition and economy and what was on sale at the grocery store. When had I last chosen something simply because it sounded good? "The salmon," I said finally. "And a glass of white wine." "Good choice. Long day?" I laughed, surprising myself. You could say that. While I waited for my food, I turned my phone off completely. Not silent, off. The relief was immediate and startling. For the first time in months, maybe years, no one could reach me. No one could ask me to solve their problems or coordinate their logistics or provide financial solutions to their poor planning. The salmon was perfectly cooked, flaky and seasoned with herbs I couldn't identify. The wine was crisp and cold, better than anything I'd allowed myself to buy in years. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and pink through the restaurant's windows. Halfway through dinner, I realized I was smiling, actually smiling. Not the practiced expression I wore when people needed me to be pleasant or accommodating. This was the smile of someone who was exactly where she chose to be, doing exactly what she wanted to do. "How's the salmon?" the waitress asked, refilling my wine glass. "Perfect," I said. Absolutely perfect. Back in my room, I took a long, hot shower, something I'd been rationing at home to keep my utility bills manageable. I used all the little bottles of shampoo and lotion the motel provided, luxuries I'd been buying the generic versions of for years. I wrapped myself in the terry cloth robe that hung on the bathroom door and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was a stranger, not the efficient problem solver who answered every call and solved every crisis. Not the grateful mother who accepted crumbs of affection in exchange for unlimited financial support. This woman looked tired but calm, sad but somehow peaceful. I turned my phone back on to check the time, and the missed notifications flooded in like a dam breaking. 23 missed calls now, 31 text messages, voicemails from people I'd never heard from except when they needed something. But buried in all the demanding messages was one that stopped me cold. A text from an unknown number with a Chicago area code. "Hi, Mrs. Stone. This is Tyler's mom, Sarah, from the wedding. Tyler can't stop talking about the nice lady who fixed his flower. Thank you for being so kind to him when he was upset. You made his whole day better." I stared at that message until my eyes blurred with tears. 5 minutes of genuine kindness to a child I'd never met had mattered more than 3 years of financial sacrifice for a daughter who saw me as a convenient service provider. I typed back, "Tyler is a wonderful little boy. Thank you for letting me know." Her response came quickly. "He wants to know if you're his new grandma." I told him maybe someday if we're lucky. Maybe someday if we're lucky. A stranger was treating the idea of my presence in her family as a blessing, while my own daughter treated my absence as an inconvenience. I turned the phone off again and climbed into bed. The sheets were clean and crisp, the mattress firm but comfortable. Outside my window, the lake lapped gently against the shore, a sound I'd almost forgotten I loved. For the first time in 3 years, I fell asleep without worrying about anyone else's problems, without my phone beside me in case of emergency, without the weight of being perpetually on call for people who took my availability for granted. I slept for 10 hours straight. I woke up at 8:30 in the morning, the latest I'd slept in years. No alarm clock, no urgent phone calls, no immediate crisis requiring my attention. Just natural sunlight filtering through the motel curtains and the sound of birds chirping outside my window. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then it all came rushing back. The wedding, the parking lot, the drive north, the decision to disappear from my own daughter's reception. I should have felt guilty, ashamed, desperate to make amends. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. Rested. I ordered coffee and toast from room service, another small luxury I'd denied myself for years, and finally turned on my phone. The screen lit up with a digital avalanche of missed communications, 47 missed calls, 62 text messages, 13 voicemails. The progression told a story of escalating desperation. but not the kind a mother dreams of receiving from her child. The early messages, sent during the reception I'd missed, were irritated and demanding. "Mom, where are you? The caterer needs to talk to you about dessert timing. Everyone keeps asking me questions I don't know how to answer." By midnight, the tone had shifted to anger. "I can't believe you would do this to me on my wedding day. Brad's parents are asking where you went and I'm humiliated. You've ruined everything." But by 3 in the morning, when she'd presumably realized I wasn't coming back, Lindsay's messages had turned manipulative. "Mom, I'm worried about you. Please just call me back so I know you're safe. I love you. I don't understand why you're doing this. Please don't punish me for something I don't even understand." The voicemails were worse. I listened to them while sipping my coffee, watching the lake through my window, trying to reconcile the frantic voice on the phone with the daughter who'd asked me to wait in the car just 24 hours earlier. "Mom, it's me. I don't know what happened yesterday, but people are saying you just left. That can't be right. You wouldn't leave my wedding. Call me back. Mom, Brad's dad is asking really uncomfortable questions about where you went, and I don't know what to tell him. Diane keeps looking at me like I did something wrong. Please call me back. Mom, it's 4 in the morning and I can't sleep. I keep thinking about you driving somewhere alone, and what if something happened to you? What if you had an accident and I was the last person who talked to you and I was mean? Please call me back." And finally, the last voicemail, left at 6:47 that morning. "Mom, I'm scared. I've been awake all night and I keep thinking about yesterday and I think I messed up. I think I've been messing up for a long time. Please call me. I need to talk to you." I listened to that last message 3 times, searching for genuine recognition rather than crisis management. Was she actually seeing our relationship clearly for the first time? Or was this just another manipulation tactic when anger and guilt-tripping hadn't worked? Before I could decide how to respond, my phone rang. Lindsay calling, probably from her honeymoon suite at the Palmer House downtown, where she and Brad were spending their wedding night before flying to Italy. I answered on the 4th ring. "Mom?" Her voice was hoarse, exhausted. "Oh my God, I've been so worried. Where are you? Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Lindsay. I'm at the lake." "The lake? What lake? What are you doing at a lake?" "Lake Geneva, where your father and I used to go." I kept my voice steady, calm. "I'm having breakfast and watching the water." Silence. Then, "I don't understand. Why did you leave my wedding?" The question hung between us, loaded with 3 years of accumulated resentment and disappointment. I could deflect it, minimize it, return to my role as the accommodating mother who never complained about her treatment. Or I could tell the truth. "Because you asked me to wait in the car, and I realized I'd been waiting my whole life for you to decide I was worth including." "Mom, that's not... I just meant for a few minutes while we got organized. I didn't mean you couldn't come inside at all. When were you going to invite me inside, Lindsay? After the ceremony I wasn't allowed to witness? After the family photos I wasn't included in? After the reception where I was supposed to coordinate vendors while you celebrated with your real family? You are my real family." The words came out sharp, defensive. "You're my mother." Am I? Because for the past 3 years I've felt more like your employee. Someone you call when you need money or problem solved or logistics coordinated, but not someone you actually want to spend time with. I heard her intake of breath, the pause that meant she was about to defend herself. "That's not fair. I've been busy with work and wedding planning and..." "When was the last time you called me just to talk, Lindsay? Not to ask for something, not to solve a crisis, not to coordinate plans. Just to hear my voice because you missed me." The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, she whispered, "I don't know. I do know. It was 18 months ago. You called to tell me about your promotion. We talked for 7 minutes, and then you had to go because you were meeting Brad for dinner. That was the last time we had a conversation that wasn't about what you needed from me." "Mom, She was crying now, but I couldn't tell if it was from genuine realization or frustration that her usual tactics weren't working. "I sold my house to move closer to you," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "I gave up my friends, my community, my support system, because you said you wanted me near. But what you wanted was a convenient resource. Someone to watch Brad's dog, someone to help with your insurance problems, someone to write checks for your wedding while you built actual relationships with people you actually enjoyed spending time with. That's not true, isn't it? Tell me about the last 6 months, Lindsay. How many times did you invite me to spend time with you that didn't involve me providing money or services? How many times did you ask about my life, my health, my loneliness? The crying got louder. I don't know. I don't remember. I've been so stressed with the wedding and work and everything. And I've been so available for your stress that you forgot I was a person with my own feelings and needs. A new voice came on the line. Brad, taking the phone from his sobbing wife. Margaret, I think maybe you should come back so you and Lindsay can talk about this in person. She's really upset. Brad, the man I'd helped finance through graduate school, whose student loans I'd helped pay, whose engagement ring I'd helped purchase, speaking to me like I was a difficult relative disrupting his honeymoon plans. Brad, I said carefully, I'm 74 years old. I'm not a child having a tantrum. I'm a woman who's been systematically excluded from her daughter's life while being expected to fund that life, and I'm tired. I understand you're upset, but this is Lindsay's wedding weekend. Can't this wait until after we get back from Italy? Italy. The honeymoon I'd helped pay for. The trip they'd take with money I'd contributed while I sat alone in my budget apartment, eating generic soup and rationing my medication to make it last longer. It's waited 3 years already, Brad. I think it can wait a little longer. I hung up and turned the phone off again. An hour later, there was a knock on my motel room door. Through the peephole, I saw a woman I didn't recognize. Well-dressed, middle-aged, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to solving problems through force of personality. Mrs. Stone? I'm Diane Patterson, Brad's mother. Could we talk? The woman who had replaced me in my daughter's affections, standing on my doorstep with the self-assurance of someone who'd never doubted her welcome in her child's life. I opened the door. How did you find me? Brad called me. They're both very upset, and frankly, I'm concerned about this situation. May I come in? I stepped aside, curious despite myself. Diane entered with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd handled family crises before, her eyes quickly assessing the modest motel room and my appearance. I brought coffee, she said, setting down a bag from a local cafe. I thought we might need it. For the next hour, I learned more about my daughter's life than I'd known in years. Diane spoke with the authority of someone who'd been truly included in Lindsay's world, who knew her daily struggles and triumphs, her fears and aspirations. She talks about you constantly, Diane said, which surprised me. But Margaret, she talks about you like you're a safety net, not a person. She says things like, Mom will figure it out, or Mom always knows what to do, or I can always count on Mom. But she never talks about your thoughts, your feelings, your life outside of how it relates to her needs. The honesty was devastating and liberating simultaneously. I think, Diane continued gently, that you've been so good at solving her problems that she's forgotten you have your own. Diane's words hung in the air between us like a diagnosis I'd been avoiding for years. You've been so good at solving her problems that she's forgotten you have your own. I poured myself another cup of the coffee she'd brought. Expensive, artisanal, the kind I'd trained myself not to buy because it seemed wasteful when store brand would do. But sitting there in that motel room, tasting something truly good instead of merely functional, I realized how many small pleasures I'd sacrificed in the name of being useful to others. She loves you, Diane continued, settling into the room's single chair with the grace of someone who'd never had to question her place in her child's life. But she loves you the way a person loves electricity, grateful when it works, frustrated when it doesn't, but never really thinking about where it comes from or what it costs to maintain. The analogy was perfect and heartbreaking. I'd become infrastructure in Lindsay's life, essential but invisible, noticed only when I failed to function properly. Yesterday, I said slowly, when you were adjusting her veil, taking pictures with her, standing in the family photos, that's what I used to do. Before I became the problem solver, I was the person she wanted close to her in important moments. Diane nodded. I know, and I felt guilty about it, honestly. She talks about you constantly, but she invites me to things. She asks my opinion about decorating and fashion and relationship issues. She treats me like family while treating you like staff. Why? The question came out smaller than I'd intended. What did I do wrong? You taught her that your love was unlimited and unconditional. You never said no, never set boundaries, never demanded reciprocity. So she learned to take without giving back, to need without appreciating, to assume you'd always be there no matter how she treated you. I felt something shift inside me, not breaking, but realigning, like a bone that had been set wrong finally snapping into its proper position. I thought that's what mothers were supposed to do. Love without conditions. Love without conditions, yes. But service without limits? That's different. That's enabling. That's teaching someone that they don't have to earn care or consideration because it will always be freely given. Diane pulled out her phone and showed me a photo from the wedding reception. Lindsay dancing with Brad, radiant and joyful, surrounded by friends and family. It was beautiful, but what struck me was that I wasn't in it. I hadn't been there to witness my daughter's happiness, to see her celebrate the life I'd helped make possible. She was devastated when she realized you'd left, Diane said. But not because she missed you, because she needed you to handle things and you weren't there. Do you see the difference? I did see the difference. And it was like looking at my relationship with Lindsay through a lens that finally brought everything into focus. She'd been devastated by my absence the way someone is devastated when their phone dies or their car breaks down, frustrated by the inconvenience, not mourning the loss of connection. What do I do now? I asked. Whatever you want, Diane said simply. For the first time in years, you get to choose what you want instead of automatically providing what everyone else needs. That afternoon, after Diane left, I took a walk along the lake shore. The same path Robert and I had walked dozens of times, but now I was seeing it through different eyes. The way the afternoon light hit the water, the sound of waves lapping against the dock, the families playing in the sand. It was all exactly as I remembered. But I was experiencing it as Margaret instead of as someone's wife or mother or problem solver. I found a bench overlooking the water and made a decision that would have been unthinkable 24 hours earlier. I called my bank. I need to stop payment on several checks, I told the customer service representative. Wedding vendor payments that were processed yesterday. May I ask the reason for the stop payments? The services weren't rendered as agreed. It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either. I'd paid for inclusion in my daughter's wedding, and that service had definitely not been rendered as agreed. The representative was professional and efficient. I can stop payment on any checks that haven't already cleared. There will be a fee for each stop payment. That's fine. I'll also need to close the joint account I share with my daughter. Certainly. I'll need to verify your identity and account information. Within an hour, I'd reclaimed control of my finances for the first time since Lindsay had convinced me to set up joint accounts for emergencies. The emergency fund she'd been steadily draining for non-emergencies. The checking account she'd been using like her personal ATM. The savings account that had dwindled from comfortable to concerning while funding her lifestyle upgrades. My phone rang constantly as the vendor payments bounced, and word spread through the wedding industry that Margaret Stone was no longer the reliable payer of her daughter's bills. I let every call go to voicemail. That evening, I drove to a restaurant I'd always wanted to try but had never been able to afford. A small Italian place with white tablecloths and candles, and a wine list that didn't include any bottles under $20. I ordered the seafood risotto and a glass of Pinot Grigio and ate slowly, savoring each bite while watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The couple at the next table was celebrating their anniversary, toasting 40 years of marriage with champagne and shared memories. I listened to them talk about their children and grandchildren, their travel plans, their comfortable retirement. They spoke about their family with joy, not obligation. Their children called to check on them, not to ask for money. Their grandchildren visited because they wanted to, not because they needed something. This was what family was supposed to look like. This was what I'd been missing while I focused on being useful instead of being loved. When I returned to my motel room, there was a message waiting at the front desk. A young woman called, the clerk said. Said she was your daughter. She's driving up from Chicago and wants to know if you'll meet her for breakfast tomorrow. I thought about it for a long time. Part of me wanted to say no, to extend my disappearance until Lindsay truly understood what my absence meant. But another part of me, the part that had been a mother longer than I'd been anything else, knew that this conversation was inevitable. If she calls back, I told the clerk, tell her I'll meet her at the Sunrise Diner on Main Street at 9 o'clock. I spent that night planning what I would say. Not the accommodating, apologetic words I'd used for years to smooth over conflicts and maintain peace, but the truth, delivered with the clarity of someone who'd finally stopped being afraid of other people's reactions to her honest feelings. The next morning, I arrived at the diner early and chose a booth with a view of the parking lot. At exactly 9 o'clock, I saw Lindsay's car pull in, the Honda Civic I'd helped her buy, paid for with money I'd saved from my nursing salary over 2 years of extra shifts and careful budgeting. She looked terrible. Her hair was unwashed, her eyes were red and swollen, and she was wearing the same clothes she'd probably slept in. This was my daughter at her most vulnerable, and every maternal instinct I possessed screamed at me to comfort her, to make everything better, to return to my role as the fixer of all problems. Instead, I stayed seated and waited for her to come to me. She slid into the booth across from me with the tentative movements of someone who wasn't sure of her welcome. "Mom," she said, and her voice broke on the single word. "Hello, Lindsay. I've been thinking all night about what you said yesterday, about the last time I called you just to talk, about how I treat you like an employee instead of a mother." She was crying now, quiet tears that slipped down her cheeks without fanfare. And I think you're right. It was the first time in 3 years that she'd acknowledged my perspective without immediately defending herself. The first time she'd accepted responsibility instead of explaining why her behavior was justified by circumstances beyond her control. "I think," she continued, "that I've been a terrible daughter, and I don't know how to fix it, but I want to try." I looked at this young woman who'd been the center of my world for 28 years, who'd shaped every decision I'd made and every sacrifice I'd accepted. And I realized that for the first time in our relationship, I had the power to choose what came next. "I'm not sure it can be fixed, Lindsay," I said quietly, "but maybe it can be rebuilt, from the ground up, with different rules this time." Her eyes widened with hope and fear. "What kind of rules?" "Rules where I'm a person, not a service. Where I'm invited to participate in your life, not just finance it. Where you consider my feelings and needs, not just assume I'll accommodate yours." She nodded eagerly. Yes, I want that. I want to be better. And rules where I say no when I need to say no, where I take care of myself first sometimes, where I don't apologize for having boundaries." This time her nod was more hesitant. "Okay, I think I can learn to respect that." "Good," I said. "Because I've stopped payment on all the wedding vendor checks, and I've closed our joint accounts. You'll need to find other ways to handle your financial responsibilities." The hope in her eyes flickered and died. "Mom, what?" "The vendors are calling me, saying their payments bounced. I don't have money to cover all of that." "Then you'll have to figure it out. The same way you'll have to figure out how to fund your honeymoon and pay your bills and manage your life without treating me like an emergency cash dispensary." "But Mom, I can't afford—" "Lindsay," I interrupted, "this is exactly what I'm talking about. Your first instinct is to make your financial problems my responsibility, but they're not. They're yours." She stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. "I don't understand. You've always helped me with money. You've always been there when I needed you. And look where that got us. I'm 74 years old, living in a budget apartment, rationing my medication, and eating generic food so I can fund a lifestyle for a daughter who asked me to wait in the car at her own wedding." The words hit her like physical blows, and I watched her face crumple as she truly understood, perhaps for the first time, the cost of her dependence on me. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." "I know you are," I said, "and I love you. But love isn't enough anymore. I need respect. I need consideration. I need to be treated like a person who matters, not a resource to be depleted." How do I learn to do that? By starting over. By getting to know me as a person instead of just using me as a solution. By inviting me to spend time with you that doesn't involve money or favors or crisis management. She nodded, wiping her eyes with a napkin. Can we start today?" I smiled, and it felt like the first genuine smile I'd given her in years. Yes, we can start today. 6 months later, I was planting tomatoes in the small garden behind my new apartment when my phone rang. Not the panicked, demanding ring I'd grown accustomed to over the years, but a gentle chime that no longer made my heart race with anxiety about what crisis needed immediate solving. "Hi, Mom." Lindsay's voice was different now, softer, more tentative, carrying the careful respect of someone who'd learned that relationships require maintenance rather than just extraction. "Hello, sweetheart. How are you?" "I'm good." Brad got the promotion, and we finally paid off the last of the wedding vendors. I wanted to call and thank you for teaching me how to handle my own problems. It had been a difficult 6 months for both of us. Lindsay had been forced to learn financial responsibility for the first time in her adult life, picking up extra freelance work to cover the bounced vendor payments, negotiating payment plans, facing the consequences of years of poor financial planning. She'd had to cancel the Italy honeymoon and settle for a weekend in Wisconsin instead. She'd had to sell some of the expensive furniture I'd helped her buy and move to a smaller, more affordable apartment. But she'd done it, without calling me to fix it, without expecting me to bail her out, without making her problems into my emergencies. "I'm proud of you," I said, and meant it completely. "I've been thinking about what you said at the diner, about inviting you to spend time with me that doesn't involve money or favors. Would you like to come over for dinner this weekend? Just to spend time together?" 6 months ago, I would have said yes immediately, grateful for any acknowledgement of my existence. Now, I considered my own schedule, my own desires, my own needs. "I'd love to," I said, "but I can't do Saturday. I'm volunteering at the community garden, and then I have book club." The pause that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was thoughtful. Lindsay was processing the reality that I had my own life now, my own commitments and friendships and activities that didn't revolve around her needs. "What about Sunday?" she asked. "I could make that pot roast you taught me to cook." "That sounds wonderful." After we hung up, I sat back in my garden chair and marveled at how much had changed. The apartment I'd moved to after leaving the Lake Geneva Motel was smaller than my previous place, but it was in a livelier neighborhood with sidewalks and coffee shops and people my age who were interested in friendship rather than just convenience. I'd joined the book club at the local library, started volunteering at the community center, taken a watercolor painting class that met on Thursday evenings. For the first time in years, I was living my own life instead of just supporting everyone else's. The transformation hadn't been easy. There had been lonely nights when I'd questioned whether independence was worth the isolation, whether setting boundaries was worth the risk of losing relationships entirely. The first month had been particularly hard, as I'd discovered how much of my identity had been wrapped up in being needed by others. But slowly, I'd begun to remember who Margaret Stone was when she wasn't defined by her usefulness to other people. I was someone who loved gardening and had strong opinions about mystery novels. I was someone who made friends easily when I wasn't constantly distracted by other people's crises. I was someone who had stories to tell and wisdom to share, not just problems to solve and bills to pay. The phone call from Tyler's mother, Sarah, had been the catalyst for much of this transformation. She'd invited me to lunch a few weeks after the wedding, and during our conversation, I'd mentioned feeling adrift without my constant role as family problem solver. "You know," she'd said, "the community center is always looking for volunteers with nursing experience. They run health screenings for seniors who can't afford regular medical care. It's not paid work, but it's meaningful work." That volunteer position had led to friendships with other women my age who were navigating their own post-career, post-marriage identities. Women who understood the complexity of loving adult children while maintaining personal boundaries. Women who'd learned, as I was learning, that self-respect was not selfish, but essential. The book club had been Martha's suggestion. Martha, who'd been widowed for 5 years and had her own stories about learning to live for herself after decades of living for others. "Reading gives you something to think about besides everyone else's problems," she'd said with the wisdom of experience. The painting class had been my own idea, sparked by a memory of art classes I'd loved in high school but had abandoned when marriage and motherhood consumed all my creative energy. My watercolors were terrible at first, muddy and uncertain, but they improved with practice. More importantly, the act of creating something purely for my own pleasure felt revolutionary after years of productivity. measured only by its usefulness to others. 3 months after the wedding disaster, I'd received an unexpected visitor. Brad had come to my apartment alone, looking nervous and carrying a manila envelope thick with papers. "These are payment plans," he'd said without preamble, "for all the money you've contributed to our lives over the past 3 years." Lindsay and I sat down and calculated everything. Rent help, car payments, insurance deductibles, wedding expenses, all of it. "We want to pay you back." I'd looked through the papers he'd prepared with the meticulous attention to detail that had made him successful in his finance career. Every check I'd written, every bill I'd paid, every crisis I'd resolved with money I couldn't afford to give. The total was staggering. Over $43,000 in 3 years. "We can't pay it all at once," he'd continued. "But we can pay $300 a month for the next 15 years, with interest. It's not enough, and it's not fast enough, but it's what we can realistically commit to." I'd stared at those papers for a long time, thinking about what $43,000 could have meant to my own life. A more comfortable apartment, better health care, the financial security that would have let me retire completely instead of picking up part-time work to survive. But I'd also thought about what rejecting his offer might mean. This was the first time either of them had acknowledged the magnitude of what they'd taken from me. The first time they'd treated our financial relationship as a debt to be repaid, rather than a gift to be forgotten. "I accept," I'd said, "but I want the payments to go into a separate account. I'm setting up a scholarship fund for older women returning to nursing school. Your money will help other people the way my money helped you." Brad had cried then, the quiet tears of someone who'd finally understood the weight of obligation and the dignity of reciprocity. The Margaret Stone Scholarship Fund had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. Word had spread through social media and local news outlets about the fund's origins. The grandmother who'd been excluded from her daughter's wedding, but chose to transform her pain into opportunity for others. Donations had poured in from strangers who recognized their own stories in mine, women who'd been taken for granted by family members, men who'd watched their mothers or wives sacrifice themselves for ungrateful children. Within 6 months, we'd raised enough money to provide full nursing school scholarships for 12 women over 50, funding their dreams of career changes and financial independence. The thank you letters I received from scholarship recipients meant more than any gratitude I'd ever received from family members, because they came from people who saw the gift as life-changing rather than expected. Last month, I'd been invited to speak at the Scholarship Fund's first annual dinner. Standing at the podium, looking out at an audience of donors and recipients and supporters, I'd felt something I'd never experienced before, the satisfaction of being valued for who I was, rather than what I could provide. Sometimes, I'd told the audience, the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the courage to stop giving everything away. Sometimes, saying no to being used allows us to say yes to being useful in ways that honor our worth, rather than exploit our generosity. The applause had been thunderous, but it was the quiet conversations afterward that had meant the most. Women my age, and some much younger, had approached me to share their own stories of learning to love others without losing themselves. Stories of difficult conversations with adult children, of boundaries established and relationships renegotiated, of the painful but necessary work of demanding respect rather than simply hoping for it. Now, as I sat in my garden watching the tomato plants I'd nurtured from seeds, I reflected on how much had changed since that horrible day in the Bellhurst Estate parking lot. Lindsay and I were still rebuilding our relationship, but it was a relationship between 2 adults now, rather than between a giver and a taker. She asked about my volunteer work, remembered my book club meetings, invited me to activities because she enjoyed my company rather than because she needed my services. Brad treated me with the careful courtesy of someone who understood he'd been given a second chance at being part of a family. He'd started calling me Mom, not the possessive claim he'd never earned, but the respectful acknowledgement of someone who'd finally learned to appreciate rather than exploit the maternal love that had been freely given. The monthly scholarship payments arrived on time every month, never late, never accompanied by excuses or requests for deadline extensions. Each check represented not just money repaid, but trust rebuilt and dignity restored. My phone buzzed with a text message, not from Lindsay this time, but from Sarah. Tyler's soccer game is Saturday at 2. You're officially his honorary grandma now, so attendance is mandatory. I laughed out loud, startling a cardinal that had been eyeing my strawberry plants. Tyler had indeed claimed me as his bonus grandmother, introducing me to his friends as Grandma Margaret, who fixes flowers and makes everything better. His unconditional acceptance had taught me that family could be chosen as well as inherited, that love could be found in unexpected places when you stopped trying to force it from unwilling sources. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine, the good wine, not the cheap stuff I'd trained myself to buy, and sat on my small balcony watching the sunset. My phone was silent, not because no one cared about me, but because the people who cared about me now respected my boundaries and independence. I thought about Robert, about what he would have said about the woman I'd become. He'd always encouraged me to stand up for myself more, to value my own needs instead of constantly prioritizing everyone else's. Margaret, he used to say, you can't love people into treating you well. They have to choose to do that on their own. It had taken me 74 years and a parking lot breakdown to truly understand what he meant. The lesson I'd learned wasn't about being selfish or withholding love. It was about understanding that respect must be earned, that boundaries are necessary for healthy relationships, and that the most powerful word in any language is no, when it's used to protect your dignity rather than enable someone else's selfishness. As the sun set behind the Chicago skyline, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that reminded me of hope and new beginnings, I raised my wine glass in a toast to the woman I'd finally learned to become, the woman who'd stopped waiting in the car. Have you ever found yourself waiting in the car of your own life, putting everyone else's needs before your own until you forgot you mattered too? Tell me your story in the comments below. If this message resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Sometimes the story that saves us is the one that reminds us we're not alone in our struggle to find ourselves again.